It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Fiona Kerr. Dr. Fiona Kerr is the organisational and neural complexity specialist in the Entrepreneurship, Commercialisation and Innovation Centre of the University of Adelaide. She combines this with a business background, spanning 27 years of experience in the areas of complex organisational strategy, review and transformation across the public, private and tertiary sectors, including power generation, automotive manufacture, defence, pharmaceuticals, universities and state government. Fiona has run a successful consulting business for many years and now combines this half-time with her role at the university. Dr. Kerr is an advisor to governments in Asia, Europe and Australia on fostering creativity and innovation, neuroleadership and futurising, and is currently writing a book on the social neuroscience of managing. Fiona is a pracademic who combines her years of practical industry experience with multidisciplinary academic research, allowing her to incorporate both practitioner and academic perspectives into comprehensible concepts which are effective in practice. Today, Dr. Kerr will examine the neuroscience of true engagement. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage. Dr. Fiona Kerr.
Thank you. Right, I'll pick this up because I wander. Right, so what we've heard of this morning is a really good example, a number of examples, as well as some overbearing theory on how you get people in a room, how you get them actually believing that they should be in that room, and that they're going to be listened to, and that the things that they say and do are going to be acted on, or at least taken into consideration. So what I'm going to do is give you a slightly different view. It's I guess a backup view of when you do engage with people, what's actually happening. So why do you have to get them in the room the way that you do? And how do you engage with people so that they believe that they're supposed to be there, and that they believe that what they say is going to be taken into consideration? So there's a lot that we know of, well, a lot we don't know about the brain, but there's a lot that we know of about how it basically turns on when you engage, the sorts of different ways that we can deal with people. So as we go along, we'll look at some of those things. So true engagement should be about people feeling like they are in the room and they are able to interact with other people. They don't have to necessarily agree. So as you can see, these people are potentially going to ask a question and say, but what about this? But it's totally being there and wanting to engage. Whereas what often we feel like is this situation where we're being put in a room so that people can kind of drop the crumbs along and lead us along a certain path. And there we go, we'll be finished. And people pick that up fantastically. So how do they and why do they? We'll have a look in a minute. So I think that my slides skip to this. Oops, I do. Let's see, right. So with a collaborative process, what we're supposed to have is the one on the left. Now, if I ask you, it'll be the only time I want you to have direct engagement. So if I ask you just to give me some words, you've come along, say you're in your local area, there's something that you really believe in very strongly, and you're going to join a group and you're going to discuss it. If you were to join the group on the left, what are some of the feelings, just some of the words that you would use to describe what you see in that group on the left?
Joy.
Joy. That's a good one. What was that? Right. And what else? Interest. Engagement. Energy. Absorption, thinking. So they're all very kind of, they're positive words. They're words that sound like these things that we're talking about here. You know, if we were to keep going, you start getting the listening and you know, even with the positive, you start getting the alignment. What if that group was full and these were the only people left and they're the ones that you now have to go and talk to? Give me a couple of words for how you now feel. Snorty, begashan. Pardon? Weak. Weepy. Weepy. Thank you, Michael. Self-absorption. So are you going to get a really, good connection to these people? No. So it's really interesting because right from the beginning, it doesn't matter what the agenda is. It wouldn't actually matter how well a problem had been phrased, how well the questions had been put in place. If these are your option when you come in, right, you're either going to walk back out again or you're going to really feel very uncomfortable. So why? What's happening? And what's the difference? When you have the first lot of feelings, because we have, and these are supposed to come one at a time, so sorry for the blast in all of the information. We've talked a bit already this morning about wicked problems. So they are the complex ones. They're the ones that are messy. They're the ones we can't sum up. They're not linear. It's not a case of if we do this, then we do this, we'll get that outcome. Just about all of the things we're discussing are the things that don't work like that. You know, they're emergent, they change over time. Different people have different agendas. They all bring different ideas to that same problem. So if you've got positive people sitting around in a capacity where they're able to exchange information and exchange ideas and explore and be curious, what you end up with is the capacity for much more complex problem solving. It actually changes the way your brain works, and I'll go through that in a minute, which is what we're supposed to be talking about. The other thing is you get resilience to keep going, because if you're embedded in that process, then you feel like it's worth staying in the process. Whereas otherwise you just won't. And one of the things is you start to trust the process itself, as well as trusting other people. If you don't start with that, if you don't embed and get those relationships first and get that feeling that this is going to be worthwhile, forget it. People will not keep going. And certainly when it's difficult and bumpy, because this always is. I come out of an industrial background in power stations and coal mines and, you know, car manufacturing and 80s and really difficult situations where I've only been shot at once and that kind of thing. But you know, people get very, very passionate about that sort of process when it really matters to them. And it's never the simple issues. It's the very messy ones that all look different to different people. Also, they get better at long-term solution building. What happens is cognitively you start to look at different information and you start to judge it on different filters, different bases. So how? I promise this is my only sort of brain slide. So when you first start to interact with people, when you first meet people, and this is a change process, because what we're engaged in, and we probably all know it, but what we're engaged in, and we talked about that this morning, is a change process. Whenever you're engaged in an engagement, whenever you're a part of trying to get people, including yourself, through a process of thinking differently about something, it's change process, it's change management, it's all those things you've learnt about with those, you know, sort of psychological changes. So when you meet people, one of the things you have to do is make a connection. So what happens straight off? The first time you meet someone face-to-face, and a lot of this stuff is face-to-face, a lot of my work in different places and my work outside the government stuff is actually around how you engage face-to-face, what your brain actually does, whether it's with artificial intelligence or, you know, there's all sorts of processes that I look at outside this that are fascinating and what sets off. So the first thing that happens is you've got mirror neurons, and a lot of people have heard about them. I won't dwell on them, but what they do is they fire immediately and they start to mirror the other person and how the other people feel. So what you get is you have a subset of mirror neurons, and they fire only when people smile or they laugh, and that's critical. What that means is we're hardwired to connect. And if anyone's interested, there's an Occam's razor on that, on neurogenesis on Radio National, if you want to listen to that one. So that kind of sums up all this stuff. But what happens is they start firing. In the team bonding situation, they start to fire. That's when you start getting that feeling of actually being taken into consideration by other people. And if you have leaders who are dealing with this, whether they're facilitators, the people coming down from on high to kind of set the process going, or you have a head at the table, if they are also engaging and positive, then that whole group technically starts to have 3 times the positive effect and in that grade. So that contagion is very definite. It starts changing the way that people sort of fire off and connect. So they work at about 1/6 of a second. The other main thing that happens is you have spindle neurons. So spindle neurons are very long neurons in most most primates, although elephants have them as well, which is fascinating. And they're called spindle because they're very long. They tend to go from the front, which is the reasoning process, to the back and to emotion, across to task. And we think that we've got them. Sorry, I keep wandering. We think that we've got them because when you're in a process, when you're in a society with a large and sort of nuanced, complex social structure, you have to get very good at reading that. It's not really simple. So the higher that level of complexity is in the social aspect of the system, the more spindle neuron activity you've got. So they are the trust neuron, the empathy neuron. They're extremely fast. We actually start to decide whether we like someone or not in about 20th of a second, which is the reason you could look at that picture and you could say, oh yeah, I'd go with that group. No, I don't want to go with them, because it's really quick. And the other thing that happens is when you're sitting in an actual group, you get oscillation, you get the movement. We're very physical animals, if you like. And you start attuning physical coordination. People are leaning towards you versus leaning back. You read body language. You start to really feel how other people are interacting with you. And it sets up something called dynamic resonance. Dynamic resonance is why human beings like to move together. I mean, you love rocking your baby. It's why we like dancing. That's really kind of high-end dynamic resonance of actually setting a physical pattern in place. But what it tends to do normally for people is if they're moving around, and who paces if they've got an issue or a question or something? Yep, lots of people. And who's ever tried to go for a walk, either if they have to think about something or if they have something to deal with someone else and you both go? One of the reasons is because it sets off your motor neuron system. So it's really technical, but the thing that it does then is when you have a complex issue or when you have something which is not just really straightforward, when you start off your motor neuron system actually tags a different part of your brain. It starts to bring up something called, through empathy and through emotion, it starts to bring up discernment. Discernment is a different filter that your brain uses to go down and pick up information that's relevant to the problem. So if you like, you use a much bigger and a different shaped sieve to pick up information. So it's a technically different way of looking at relevance. So it's a very interesting process. The other thing that happens is when you're moving, you get all sorts of really wonderful things. You get oxygen in your brain, you get BDNF, which is it's a growth factor for your brain. You can actually start making new brain cells. All sorts of things happen when you're moving and thinking. So your brain is we are built to move and make decisions. We're built to actually walk 20 miles a day and make complex decisions in a changing situation that we haven't met before. That's how human beings are built. Instead, what do? We sit in rooms and we don't move and we try and make everything orderly and we try to control what we're going to do. We're not built to do that, and life's not built to do that. It's not the way it happens. So true public engagement then needs a number of things. So the first step, we'll deal with each one of them. So respect and delegation, a clear mandate and empowerment. We've all heard the words, and they're true, and we've talked about it this morning. Very good examples. So what's happening in your brain with each one of those? The first one, respect, is around talking positively with people. So when you do that, what actually happens is, now I've talked about the fact that you've got different chemicals in your brain when you're feeling positive and engaged. It actually starts to change the information that your memory and your brain brings forward towards an idea. Because what happens with any information, the way that your memory works is every single piece of information that you've got doesn't get held in little packets saying, oh, that's about the difficulty with water allocation, and that's about, the difficulty with this state government process. It fractionates all over the brain into tiny little bits. And whenever you bring it back, a memory on any idea that you've got, the memory actually chooses which bits to bring back that are relevant. If you've got lots of positive chemicals, you're tending to listen to someone else and your brain's bringing down the bits that are aligning with the other person. You're seeing the similarities. So you're choosing information to make you align, that resonates. So it's a lot to do with that empathy, that emotion. And you also get to be able to think long term. So I talked about discernment. One of the things about discernment, the process of discerning, is that you look for information to do with consequences of outcomes. Not this short term, just what I want right now. But what will happen if we don't do this? You know, will our kids get good education? Will I be all right in ageing? Will my grandchildren get a good process when they're 60 in this society? It's a very different way of looking at things. And potentially, when you're really positive, you can build actual new brain. Your parasympathetic nervous system fires, you get all sorts of immune chemicals, and that's what your brain uses to build new dendrites and new networks. And if I was to scan, say, a group of us working on a novel, interesting problem, when we're feeling positive, that first group, not the second group, then what I would see was you would start to build a new net, and every one of us would build a net which was fairly similar, which is incredible. You're carrying around this kind of matched net. So it really does work. It works on a cognitive level if you can start to get alignment. It's a physical change. On the other hand, you talk at people. So if you get people coming down that just want to, you know, sell you something, or an expert that knows all about it and doesn't really think that you should be asked in the first place, what happens is people know it immediately. So what your brain starts to do, the information it brings down in the memory is all the differences. And it starts to look at what you're saying in order to pick holes in it. No, you're wrong. So you're not listening to agree, you're listening to disagree. It's a different form. It closes down optimism. You start to get very short term, which is just, well, I want to get out of here, but first I want to make you look stupid. And also it minimises contribution. It really is not a process that's going to get a very good outcome. It's because your sympathetic nervous system fires. If you get people sufficiently annoyed, then their old brain will start to fire. And they get cortisol and they get adrenaline, and then they get ugly. And so what you then get is you get this real kind of cognitive and emotional disconnection. They don't like it. And interestingly, if you think about, again, the filter in your memory, what you start to get is people start to feel that this is unfair. And what they really do is, it's fascinating. It's the same if you've ever led a change process in an organisation, or if you've been part of it. If you don't trust the process, what do you remember? You remember all the things that went wrong. And it's because physically, that's what your brain starts to filter in. And all of the stuff that went right gets left in your corpus callosum. It doesn't get picked up. So what you're bringing forward to think about is only the stuff that doesn't work. Trust gets lowered, and you start to avoid all the things you have to do in a complex situation, all of those alternatives that you have to go through in order to find something that will work eventually, because you have to deal with, you have to go through lots and lots and lots of things that don't quite work to wiggle around and get the ones that do. None of that happens. And further, you get this kind of mob rule, you get negative contagion, you get other people set other people off, and then nobody's happy. So what does that mean? If you truly delegate, and just looking right now, I'm doing a project right at the moment of looking at the ones that are working really well and the ones that don't work so well. And it's the same here. It's the same in the work in Finland, it's the same in Europe, it's the same in Asia. True delegation is arming with the facts, so it's getting that information out there. It's also arming with resources. So there's all the difference in the world between getting people out there and saying, okay, well, you can have a discussion on this, and actually saying, we want you to be a big part of how, say, water allocation, how you allocate water. The best process, of course, is if people come to you and say, we know we have to change, we know there's a problem here, so we want to work with you on how to do it. But the next best thing is getting them very good information so that they will decide in the end that they need to change. We spend most of our time convincing people of solutions, not the problem. It should be the other way around. Once people decide there is a problem, they're off, they're running, they're far. But you've got to get them to that stage first. So armed with the facts and resources, and then being allowed to do that sort of leading and changing and working with them. Again, a really good example is a group that decided there was something wrong, took the information, had the specialists there. They had huge issues between two camps in the regional area, but in the end, they sorted it out because they knew they had to, and they actually gave a potential policy up to the minister's office. So they really got there. And then there was a timing issue if it sat too long, but it doesn't matter, it was there. And the cognitive effects are, what you do is engage the complex thinkers. You give people the capability, you will get the ones that can grapple with those big questions. You'll actually get them identifying and coming forward. You won't just get the people that are there to complain. And they start to look for what's called disconfirming information. They start to have a look at, well, what are we missing here? What are alternatives? You know, I might be a drip irrigator and I think that anyone who flood irrigates is wrong, but instead I'll look at the whole process and how it affects the aquifer. So it's a different way of looking at information. Another thing is clear boundaries. So you talked a lot about bounding. And it's very different. When you've got a clear mandate and agreed non-negotiables, we know that's the theory, but what actually happens? So what's happening is when you get a boundary around something, if I was to say to each table, right, for the next 5 minutes, I want you to sit there and I want you to be creative. Great, what are you going to do? Whereas if I was to say to you, all right, for the next 5 minutes, what I want you to do is have a really good discussion about being very creative and innovative around how we might move people around the city of Adelaide if they don't take their cars within the mile. That's it. You've got a boundary, and within it, you play. Off you go. You have to bound ideation, because otherwise you don't know scopes, you don't know where you're going, you can't structure. You know, am I saving the whole world or am I saving this local field? You've got to get that knowledge about what you're actually playing with, because as you noticed, everyone was nodding about what they could then do, it immediately allows for your brain to go, okay, now I've got something I can expand and start to play with it. So it's really critical that people know those boundaries. In empowerment, there's a few things, that's used all the time, lots and lots, that word. What it actually means is things like, if you've started to come to a group to talk about these sorts of things or to deal with something in your area, you want to know that you're going to be meaningful, you're actually going to add value. You need to feel like you add value. Choice. Are you going to be able to use your judgment? Are you going to be able to choose different options? Competence. Can you use your own competence satisfactorily? You know, can you feel pride about even being there? Progress, is it moving forward? If it's just sitting there and it's stuck, it can get really frustrating. And another thing is values alignment. So one of those early pictures, the people weren't actually necessarily agreeing. You can disagree on how to do something. But if I'm sitting there and I'm discussing with you, and you have a very different idea of how to go about something, but I believe that you and I are aligned in wanting the best, then we'll stay talking. So that values alignment is really important, which means that leadership becomes really critical. So a lot of my work was in, and is still in, I guess, creating and leading well. And interestingly, over 20 odd years, the thesis is about two major things that I found in all the organisations and the large structures where leadership is powerful and adaptation is what comes out. The first is that there's a clear and passionate idea about what needs to be done. And people believe that that's where the leaders are coming from. That's why they've asked you to be part of this question. And the second is that there's very strongly held values. So we might disagree about how to go about something, but if you really agree that we've got that alignment of values about what we're trying to achieve, it's really powerful. Then there's pragmatic optimism. So if someone comes out and you think, oh, well, you get the feeling that that leader thinks it's not really going to go anywhere, again, you stop the process almost, technically. And the other thing is leaders who are very good at this know that it takes the time it takes. So what do I mean by that? It's an exponential graph. What you get is all the things we've just talked about, the getting together, the learning about each other, the building trust, the getting your head around all the facts, that takes a lot of time. So you get this kind of thing that looks like it's just bubbling along and not really moving. But once that all clicks and people get in their heads, right, this is what we've got to change, I actually trust the people I'm dealing with, I've got this stuff in my head, then it goes off and it's very fast. And the end process is quicker. But lots of times, senior people want to see constant movement. So where are they? Where are they? And it's just not how it works. And too often, they stop the process before it matures into that liftoff. So they know how to wait for liftoff. They're very good at that. The effects are things like high group trust, very strong collective identity, and high contribution. And in the areas that I've gone and spoken to people where this process has worked, they want to go on with the next one. You know, some of them have finished the process. They've done a project or they've given an idea up to a ministry, and it's a case of, okay, well, we're really good at this now, so where's the next one? They actually like being part of that process because they believe in it. And that's when you start getting capacity in the environment. So the sorts of things you don't do. You don't call it consultation if you've already decided. People know, you know, they're not stupid. So if you go out just trying to convince or sell or tell, don't bother, or call it something else. Don't call it consultation. Don't overpromise. So I don't know who knows Utopia, but isn't it close to the mark? And so what you end up with very often is, especially if you've got a very positive government who wants to do something well, they're dying to sort of go out there. So you've just got to wait. So that it doesn't mean that you don't talk about it. You talk about it. You start that context building early, but you don't promise the earth. So it means things like you announce what you can announce. You don't claim very, very sort of early on that if this is going to be wonderful and change everything. And if something is having a hiccup, then you don't cover that up either. You talk about it because people need to know why it's taking the time it takes on your side too. Don't try and replace representative democracy. So it's not going to be that suddenly this group can run the country tomorrow. What you're doing is you are complementing it. You're increasing capability for people to deal with those complex issues. And also, you don't run things like citizens' juries on trivial issues. It takes a long time, lots and lots of effort. So honour that. Give people something that is important enough for them to make the time to do it. 5 minutes. So, representative democracy then, one of the things that I notice in the country, some of the countries that I'm in that do it really well, they're very good at differentiating a number of things. So one of them is the difference between that sort of acute and wider balance. So a really good rule of thumb, there's no perfect answer, but a good rule of thumb is if it's an acute local problem, that's when you can get your citizens' juries, it's when you get your groups in there, it's when you can have a long tail. Some of the community boards that I've been talking to, they're 3 years, it's not quick. And so you get a very high interface, it's very inclusive, but you get a really good lot of information that comes out and informs policy. So it's really worth it in those areas. And they're very much self-driving. But you also, they also have this wider focus all the time. So there's a consistent, if you like, water torture and drop of this is where we're going and these are the contexts that we're dealing with. And so it's not these surprises. You're building that sort of frame all the time for people to know where you're going. If you've got really consensual political cultures, people talk about places like Finland, isn't it wonderful? And it is. I mean, I'm dealing with Finland, it's quite different in some of the things. So some of our areas are looking at what do we bring here to do some of those things well. So they do ask the really complex questions. And they ask them, they go out for information. They might take a year to collect information and put it out there. They're very good at all that. And they decouple the long-term or controversial issues from the political ones. So they understand that difference between, you've got your sort of democracy, what's the word? You've got your politicians and you've got your bureaucrats. Click. And so that sort of bureaucratic aspect can take 20 to 30 years. They're there for the long haul. They can really make changes. And you've got this kind of political churn of vote for me, they don't know what they're doing. And they're very good at sort of balancing that and taking some of the things that need those long-term things into the long-term base, but still managing that interface, because you'll always get leakage. They tend to invest in the very robust research. As I said, the last time I was there, they were looking at the age of children starting school. And it was very much a case of looking for a whole year, that information. They gave that information each time out into the papers, not the dumbed-down sound bites, the full, real studies, all of them. And people read them because then people decided. So that's at that kind of other end of a very high level of maturation of capacity. But if we think about the cognitive side, we've got a high trust, higher engagement, we're fostering that decision-making skill, and we've got people who are quite able to engage with those kind of decisions. So a quick poll, the sorts of things, so who makes them trust you trust your government? The Gallup poll in 47 countries looks at, do they perform their core tasks well? Are they seen as honest, moral, working in the public interest? There's a complete difference between, what's your main aim to push the country forward at a federal level? If it's something like getting down debt, what's that? It's a very different process than are we building, what do we want to build? Do we want to build good society with good health and good ageing and proper education? And so it's a really interesting process. You admit when there's mistakes and you interact a lot. Otherwise, you tend to get this kind of thing. Well, they don't trust us, why should we trust them? And that, again, is one of those things that fosters itself. So, what do? So it means that in any of these processes, whether it's at the local water allocation process or a state level or a country level, you maintain a sense of momentum. So it's not the bickering about, again, they don't know what they're doing, we do. It's where are we going? Where are we moving? How are we getting there? What's this sense of momentum? It's a very clear dominant frame. So are we going to look at this problem on a basis of affordability, ecology, are we trying to build a comparative advantage in building ships, those sorts of things? What is the reason you're looking at this? Because that frames everything, as we've heard this morning. And then get very good at the nuanced message. So people should be able to talk about this in a pub, a business table. It should be able to be talked about with these kind of word pictures you get. The outcome is you get this increased connectivity across different parts of your group to be able to talk about the problem, and allows the interfaces to adjust. What I mean by that, sounds technical, think of a gearbox, is different parts of it have different time frames. So you've got people locally who we all know want things to happen tomorrow. We want to change it right now. You've got middle bits of sort of maybe government parts or staff who are dealing with them. Then you've got large bureaucracies or a ministry, which is long time frames. And you've got to try and make them mesh. But if you've got that kind of positive environment, then you're going to agree that you're going to have more faith and patience in that. And so the last thing is what you end up with, hopefully, what we're trying to get in this process is a shared, clear what. And then they can be very creative discussing the how. You end up with people who are actually capable in engaging. And I guess the end product, the process you want to kind of get towards is the guided self-organisation rather than control. So people can take a problem, discuss it, and they can give you really good information going forward. Thank you.